Good evening and welcome to this 2021 Wisconsin Forest History Association webinar. My name is Don Schnitzler. I'm a member of the Forest History Association of Wisconsin and also a member of its board of directors. And on behalf of the association, I'd like to welcome you to this evening's presentation. Tonight, we're lucky to have a talk about called Planning Our Future, Wisconsin's 2020 Forest Action Plan. The Wisconsin Forest Action Plan is a 10-year strategic plan for the forestry community that spans 2020 to 2030. During the webinar, our presenters will discuss the value of the Forest Action Plan, the collaborative process for developing the plan, and key findings and goals as we look toward the future. The speakers tonight are Amanda Koch and Colleen Matula. Amanda and Colleen are both members of the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Amanda is the forestry planner who led the collaborative process for developing the Forest Action Plan. And Colleen, again, also a member of the Division of Forestry, is the forest ecologist and silviculturist for the department. Before our presentation begins tonight, or our presenters begin, a couple brief comments to kind of aid with the success of the webinar. First, if you have any questions during tonight's presentation for the speakers, please use the chat feature at the lower portion of the screen to put those questions in. And you can put the questions in anytime during the presentation. That same chat feature can also be used if you have any problems or experience any problems with the connection. Use the chat feature again to reach out to the Forest History Association team, and either Tom and I will try to help you solve those problems. Now, along with you, I'm looking forward to learning about the Wisconsin Forest Action Plan, and so I'd like to turn this over to Amanda and Colleen. Amanda, Colleen, the platform is yours.
Thank you, Don.
Great, thank you. Just sharing my screen. Can you guys see it?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for having us. We're really excited to be here today to share with you a little bit about the Forest Action Plan. We're going to go over what the Forest Action Plan is, how it was developed, some major results of the assessment, goals and strategies that were identified, and how we can all use the Forest Action Plan as we think about the future of forestry in Wisconsin. So the statewide Forest Action Plan, as Don mentioned, is a 10-year, really high-level strategic plan for the entire forestry community that spans 2020 to 2030. States develop a Forest Action Plan to fulfill a federal requirement of the Cooperative Forestry Assistance Act, as amended by the 2008 and 2014 Farm Bills. Annually, this brings between $3 and $6 million in federal funding to the state in the form of DNR core funding and federal grants to forestry partners, supporting projects and work like the Driftless Forest Network, which work to develop and implement tools and strategies to increase landowner engagement in active forest management, and work to increase capacity to build relationships between professionals and landowners. My Wisconsin Wood Partnerships, which focus on increasing landowner engagement throughout Wisconsin, allowing for landowners to manage their land based on their goals. Bringing Forestry Full Circle, which develops localized approaches for capturing value and enhancing public benefits of urban forests by building awareness of urban wood markets and strengthening the urban supply chain. Bringing sustainable forestry outreach into the 21st century, which tests new methods and digital outreach strategies to connect with increasing women forest landowners. Invasive species education and control, numerous reforestation projects, and fire prevention education and tools, just to name a few of many important and significant contributions to the state. The Forest Action Plan reflects upon the current and historic state of Wisconsin forests to complete an assessment of the state of forestry in Wisconsin, and it identifies conditions and trends that the forestry community will collectively face. With this current state in mind, the plan establishes goals and strategies that will serve as a guidepost, really helping us navigate the coming years. The plan does not identify specific targets, methods, assignments, or prescribe the work of any member within the forestry community, but it's really a tool that we can use to share forest relevant data, information, and trends define and explore emerging threats to Wisconsin forests, identify specific regions or issues that may benefit from increased attention, focus the state toward work that's really important, and assist partners within the forestry community to really find their niche in addressing the plan's goals and strategies and to spark action. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process we use to develop this 2020 plan. While the division facilitates the process for developing our forest action plan, large emphasis was placed on collaboration, as this plan is really intended to speak to the entire forestry community. To achieve this, our process had two major components. One was operational partner group, and the other was public review. So operational partner groups were comprised of over 75 partners and stakeholders representing over 20 different sectors of the forestry community, including landowners, foresters, industry, county land, federal land, research and academia, environmental organizations, urban and community forestry, local governments, tribes, wildlife organizations, and more. These partner groups were tasked with developing the documents through surveys, draft development and reviews, and then workshops. The division synthesized the work of these operational partner groups for public review. In total, 3 public review periods on drafts and a workshop focused on identifying and refining goals and strategies were offered to the broader public. At this workshop, partners came together to discuss the status of our state's forests and what the future could or should look like, and started to think about how they might fit into the different goals and strategies we were working together to identify. So the first 2 public reviews were sent to partners who signed up for what we had at the time a Forest Action Plan Gov Delivery listserv, and over 1,000 people were invited to review through that and signed up through that mechanism. And then the final review in spring 2020 was sent to all forestry lists, reaching over 30,000 people. Many of the comments we received in the final review included messages of support for the document and for the process. Throughout the process, changes were made to refine the document with feedback and input received during the review periods, both minor tweaks and major changes. These review periods were held to really help ensure that the varied perspectives were reflected in the document wherever possible. We submitted the final document to the Forest Service in June, and it was approved by them in November 2020. So you can find the document by going to the web address posted at the top of this slide, or by visiting dnr.wi.gov and just searching Forest Action Plan. It'll be the first thing that comes up. When you visit the Forest Action Plan page, you'll see that there are a number of ways that you can read it. This is because one of the big goals for developing the document this time around was to make it as useful as possible to all the different partners within the forestry community. So you can access the whole document, it's almost 200 pages. You can read it all at once, or you can just consume sections by interest, whether it's taking a deep dive into resources and ecosystems, which includes sections on forest characteristics and ecology and management, fire management and forest health, climate change, which discusses climate change in Wisconsin forests and opportunities for mitigation and adaptation, socioeconomics, which includes forest economics contributions, forest products, workforce needs pathways, forest certification, recreation, and cultural resources and values, or by ownerships, which include sections on private forest lands, public forest lands, and urban and community forestry. So you know what it is now and how it was developed and where to find it, but what did we actually find? I'm going to hit on some of the primary opportunities and threats identified in the plan, and then I'm going to pass it over to Colleen, who's going to talk in more detail about some of the findings. So major opportunities that we found include opportunities to increase age diversity and resiliency in our forests, continuing efforts to improve communication and collaboration regarding wildfire suppression and outreach campaigns, expanding the use of prescribed fire as a tool to manage fire-dependent landscapes, finding new uses for tree species and sizes that are increasing in abundance, encouraging landowners to actively manage their woodlands, and making sure that every Wisconsinite has access to trees and all the benefits they provide. Significant threats, on the other hand, include the far-reaching effects of changing climate conditions, low regeneration of some tree species due to deer browse and other disturbances, impacts of insects and disease like the widespread mortality of ash trees caused by the emerald ash borer, and range expansion of multiple invasive plant species. So now I'm going to pass it over to Colleen.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. And let's see if I can flow. There we go. You see my screen? Okay, so, you know, the Forest Action Plan is a lot longer document and it's not a light read, but there are so many tidbits of information about Wisconsin forestry that I know you will enjoy. I'd like to highlight only a few of the tidbits tonight because, you know, we only have an hour or so. I will review the framework and how we put it together, forest cover characteristics, attributes such as the issues that we face in forestry, like regeneration issues, forest health, and climate change. So the framework and the approach to the Forest Action Plan, we set the stage by looking at the ecological landscapes and forests. So the framework, here the state is divided into 16 areas called ecological landscapes. And these are landscape attributes that are very similar in each ecological landscape, such as soils, geology, forest types, and hydrology. So the area is further explained by differences in vegetation and climate. And as you can see, there's this black line that divides the state, and that's called the tension zone that some of you might be familiar with. And here we might find more cold adapted plants up north and warm loving species to the south. But let's go back again and think about, we have 17 million acres of forest land in Wisconsin. That's a lot of forests. Wisconsin can also be divided by forest area and land cover. So here's a breakdown of the percentage of each, with forest and agriculture being at the top of these categories. And they also are economic drivers for our state. If we compare other states, Minnesota might have slightly more acreage of forest land, and Michigan, to the other side of us, might have slightly less acreage of forest land. So we're kind of stuck in the middle. So we can't go remiss without discussing fragmentation and parcelization. Here we describe this as impacting our forests. Most of our forests are privately owned. And here's a breakdown here with a 57% individual families, family-owned forests. But this change in ownership could mean a change in how forests are being managed or parcelized. You know, the change of ownership on average changes every 7 years. This could cause a lot of impacts to our forests. We also notice that the road density and infrastructure through these forests are increasing as well. So these are just some indicators that we'd like to keep track of and highlighted in the Forest Action Plan. So I'd like to highlight next some of the general forest characteristics, such as forest structure, dynamics, but we can assess this in many different ways and highlight this in many different ways, maybe by composition, by forest type, and by acres. We can talk about volume per cubic feet per acre. We could also talk about age class and size classes. We can look at the forest inventory, FIA, over time, over different time periods. We can also look at measures of sustainability, growth to removals, soil and water quality, and then also measures of biodiversity. And a lot of this is reflected in the Forest Action Plan. So take, for instance, we have a chart here that describes the dominant forest types in Wisconsin and how they've changed over the two inventory periods of 2009 and then 2017. So you can see that some forest types, such as oak and maple, have slightly increased over that inventory period. But then again, look at some other forest types like aspen and birch that are on the decline by acreage. So those are another concerns that we should think about and how we're managing these areas. They're a part of the bigger picture. So here we have a closer example of one of my favorite cover types is paper birch. And this example is of a forest type that's declining. And we can think of a lot of reasons why this species or this forest cover type is declining. It's declining by all size and age classes, by acreage and by volume. And there's been a lot of insect and disease issues that have affected paper birch, like bronze birch borer, things like that. But we also think about focusing on management strategies to enhance birch. Birch is a species that takes some aggressive techniques to get birch back and to regenerate. So it might not be as popular to private landowners to either do clear cutting or shelter wood. So that's just an example of one species that is declining that we found when we were assessing these forest types in the action plan. And I have to also mention that paper birch is a very important tribal resource, both culturally and spiritually. So that's another example out there. So here's another characteristic of our forest. We are encountering what's called the middle-aged bubble. So what does that mean? The chart here shows a general statistic about all of the ages across all forests. And I have to remind you that many of our forests are a result of the cutover during the late 1800s and the early 1900s. So this age class diversity is somewhat of a reflection of that cutover period. Thus, we are dealing with an aging forest with many of our stands, such as maple and oak, in that middle age, 60 to 80 years old. This is also a result of management primarily using uneven age management practices. But we are also seeing declines in the younger age classes, such as aspen and birch, because they're just not being aggressively regenerated. And then also, like I mentioned before, forest health issues. And then also on the older age classes, we're seeing a decline as well. We don't have as many acres in the old age classes as well. So this leads me to my next discussion about forest productivity. Here we are seeing many forest types with growth outpacing removals, and removals is what I mean by harvesting. So we're seeing the growth far exceed the removals, where the volume is increasing. So, but yet we still have a lack of regeneration in some cover types, such as oak, which has triggered us to take a closer look at what's going on. We do have deer browse issues. We have insect and disease that is a possible contribution to some of these declines. But so those are some of the things that we should think about as we're looking at forest productivity. So in summary, the forest characteristics, we have a lot of good things to report in this action plan about our forests in Wisconsin, but we still must keep an eye to the changes that are occurring over time as we manage these forests. And also get private landowners more interested and aware of what's happening on the landscape. And there are some goals and strategies in the Forest Action Plan that are specific to private landowners. So I just have a couple more slides here. And so the Forest Action Plan does have an excerpt on soil and water. And many of us know some of our guidelines out there. The foresters use best management practices for water quality. We also have guidelines for woody biomass harvest that protects soil quality as well. If these guidelines are used effectively and applied correctly, then we can protect our forest and water quality and soils. Our organization does keep track of some of the harvesting and the BMPs that are applied, and we're applying a lot of these practices correctly. In fact, I think there was like a 90% rating in the last measurement and monitoring. But with that, we have to keep our eye on climate change and the weather, which can lead us to a smaller window of frozen ground conditions when we're harvesting out there. So take, for instance, northern hardwood, mesic northern hardwood forest types. Usually those forest types are harvested in the winter. Well, now we're encountering a smaller window of frozen ground. So we have to be sure that we're protecting the soils and water quality in those areas. But that is a concern on the radar. And then also, with our woody biomass guidelines, consecutive harvests over time on these sensitive soils may deplete nutrients. So these guidelines that we have in place are well known by our foresters. They're reviewed by our foresters. They're developed by foresters across the state, across agencies. And they're very helpful at protecting and managing our forests in a sustainable way. The Forest Action Plan also has a section on wildlife and ecological diversity. So here, we cite the most recent report on what is called the Wildlife Action Plan. And this is a comprehensive resource for conservation of rare and declining species. So it identifies changes in forest structure, which will also impact changes in species and species diversity. So some of the highlights from this plan that we brought forward in the Forest Action Plan is early successional forests and old growth forests might be on the radar as maybe taking a closer look at these areas. And then also natural disturbance regimes have been altered. So maybe we should take a look at conservation actions in fire prescribed burning, which a lot of folks are implementing as we speak right now. So the next slide here, another section is forest health. And we're keeping an eye on pests and disease and the role they play in forest ecosystems. And believe me, we've been seeing pest outbreaks that we have some concerns about, such as emerald ash borer in our lowland ash and our upland ash as well. Oak wilt is another one of concern. So, and also in tamarack, we have a forest health concern as well. So these large outbreaks can impact, forest succession, sometimes to the point where other species are taking over, because a loss of one species might be an advantage to another. So these goals and strategies in the action plan focus to monitor these stressors. And they also highlight in the action plan that we need to provide for an adaptive response to these changes as a result of forest health issues, and also make these science-based decisions based off of And I wouldn't be remiss if I didn't mention climate change, and I mentioned it throughout my talk here. You know, forests provide a great opportunity to address climate change, and through reforestation, which can reduce emissions that we're finding out more and more. Today I was out in the lowland swamps planting in ash, understory, a variety of species. So that was interesting. We're trying to be more prepared for emerald ash borer, so we're learning what species can adapt to those lowland conditions. But we know climate change is already impacting our most vulnerable forest types, such as black ash and our boreal species like paper birch. So we can expect, especially in the northern latitudes, that climate change will impact the overall function, composition, health, and productivity of these forest types. With initiatives such as the Governor Evers Million Tree Program and other programs such as the Trillion Tree Program in the nation, we're identifying management strategies that will help address this topic by using forestry and reforestation. The things that we can see on the downside, though, for climate change is we can see and anticipate warmer and shorter winters, more precipitation during some parts of the year and some parts of the state. And we can also expect these larger storm events, such as the one over in near Langlade County last year. We had a big storm event that happened, which can impact forest management. And over there in Langlade County, I guess they had a large outbreak of garlic mustard following that large storm and wind event that happened. So we can expect more of these to happen and impact our forests. With the longer growing seasons, you know, how is this going to impact our trees and how they grow? We are just beginning to understand how trees can grow under these conditions. And we also have been seeing stressors from insect and disease already. So with that, I want you to think about what climate change may do and to your forest in your backyard. Sometimes, like in this picture I have to the right here, sometimes we have to rely on the past to move forward in our future. So here's a relic of forest fire history in Iron County. We found a stump that was burned in the woods. And yeah, so the guys are just pointing out some impacts to forest fires, probably at the early 1900s that occurred. So with that, I believe you're going to be taking it over, Amanda. That was my snapshot.
Okay, thank you, Colleen. Just share my screen again. Okay, so Colleen did a great job kind of starting to explain some of the findings within the forest action plan and referencing some of the goals and the strategies. There's a ton more in there, and I really encourage you to look at it. There's more, she spoke a lot to the forest characteristics, ecology management, and the climate change, but there's also a lot on socioeconomics, forest industry, and forest ownership. So it's a really rich document. But thinking about the assessment portion, which Colleen focused on, the other component is goals and strategies. So goals and strategies are established within the Forest Action Plan and used as a catalyst for certain federal grant proposals like landscape scale restoration grants and Great Lakes Restoration Initiative grants. Goals are broad statements that really set the stage for identifying desired future conditions, and strategies sit under goals. Strategies are a statement of potential effort or action intended to achieve the goal. The strategies and goals identified with the plan are designed to be really clear in their intent, but broad enough to reflect the many critical ways that individual members and organizations of the forestry community can address them. In total, in the 2020 plan, we have 22 goals and 152 strategies identified. Some key examples include keeping forests as forests to maintain the long-term value and benefits they provide, that people, property, infrastructure, and forested land are resilient to wildfire, that forest health threats are identified and managed in a fashion that is adaptive and responsive to multiple values. And Colleen referenced that one in her slides. That forests are resilient and adaptable to future conditions. That Wisconsin is a hub for diversified forest markets and non-market forest benefits. That more landowners are actively engaged in making informed decisions about the management of their woods, and that urban and community forests are more diverse with increasing tree canopy. So this is just a really small snapshot of everything going on in there. So I just wanted to give you a taste of that. When you go to the Forest Action Plan goals and strategy, you'll see that they're all organized in a really long table. And this is intended to allow you to see the goals and strategies for any particular area you're looking at, like fire or like private forestry, but also to see the overlap at the same time. For example, here we're looking at the goal of forests are diverse in structure, composition, function, and complexity across all forested landscapes. And you see on the right-hand column here that this has been identified or has ties or overlap with different sections. And there's a little table that shows you what each one of these icons mean. But here we have general forest characteristics, fire, forest health, private forestry, and public forestry. So as Colleen started to paint this picture of where we are now based on our current state, goals and strategies were then developed to answer the question of where do we want to be in 10 years and how might we actually get there? This plan is really too big for any one entity to take on. Therefore, one of the higher levels of goals of this plan is for organizations, individuals, and groups within the forestry community to use the Forest Action Plan to help them really define their roles within the broader context so that we can collectively work together towards our shared goals and so that we can all really take meaningful action. As one example, the Division of Forestry, we will use this plan as a foundation for our own strategic planning. So we're now in the process of beginning the development of our third strategic plan, and we will be relying heavily on the 2020 Forest Action Plan and all of the goals and strategies developed as our backbone and a primary input into our process. So with that, I really encourage you to check out the plan, think about which goals and strategies really resonate with you as an individual or as an organization. A plan like this doesn't do a ton of good sitting on a metaphorical shelf or rather an unvisited web page. From my perspective, the development of this plan was incredibly rewarding. I got to meet a lot of partners, learn about a lot of great work occurring across the state, moving us forward. And it is such a valued resource as we begin to enter our division strategic planning efforts and think about our role within the forestry community. So I hope you take some time to find what within the Forest Action Plan might provide value to you as you think about the future of forestry in Wisconsin and your role in it. So with that, we hope you've learned a few things and take some time to check out the plan and all the great work that the forestry community put into it. And with that, we're happy to take any questions you might have.
So hello, everybody. My name is Tom Giroux. I'm going to be facilitating the discussion tonight. So far, Don and Schnitzler and I have asked a couple of questions, but feel free to put your questions in there. So we'll start with Don's question. Colleen mentioned the Trillion Tree program. I recently came across a website for Trillion Trees, but really don't have a good understanding of what the program does. Can you explain a little bit more about the Trillion Trees? And I would add also Governor Evers' Million Trees program too. So.
Yes, well, the Trillion Trees program I'm not as familiar with, but most recently the Governor Evers plan rolled out where some of us in the forest community are identifying critical areas where we can, reforest areas like agricultural areas that fallow fields, things like that in the state. So I know there's a map out there that I recently saw with counties that are highlighted that we can focus maybe a tree planting program. And then also we're trying to get private landowners encouraged. Our state nursery actually has sold more seedlings this year than they have in the past couple of years. They've had a really successful year with seedling production and then sales of tree seedlings. So we're identifying target areas, but we're encouraging everybody to step up here as far as focusing on areas and where they'd like to see more trees on the ground. And it certainly can help reduce emissions across the state as well. So I think it's going to be one piece of the puzzle, not to answer it all.
So we're gonna, I think, switch to Amanda here. Are the goals and strategies ranked? Is there a goal that is a higher priority than the others? That's from Nicole.
Yeah, good question. We didn't rank the goals because it's really intended to speak to the whole forestry community. When we go through as the Division of Forestry and look at the goals and which ones we're best positioned to take on, we'll think about our resources and our capabilities and kind of do an internal ranking when we're trying to figure out that. But that wouldn't mean anyone is more important than the other, just about what we can actually do. And so the fact that they're not ranked is because they're going to mean something different to everyone, and we want everyone to be able to see what's important to them and resonates with them.
So I've been thinking about this myself. I mean, you've got this broad plan, and it's not just for the public forests, the state and federal forests, which take up most of the north. And if you include the county forest, that's a huge chunk of the land, but it also includes all those private landowners. And there's as Colleen alluded to, some fragmentation going on. And so how do you get us all moving kind of in the same direction and achieving better forest management?
Yeah, I can take a stab at it, and Colleen, then you can follow up if you got any additional things to add. So I think there's a lot of initiatives out there to help landowners think about their land and get in touch with folks to help them either write a plan or do a walkthrough and think about the long-term management of their individual parcels. Different entities are doing that in different ways. We've got the Aldo Leopold Center, we have our DNR program and our DNR foresters, there's private foresters, there's My Wisconsin Wood, there's Woods Camp, there's a ton of resources out there that are just growing and really interested and invested in connecting landowners with resources. And so this plan really supports that work and highlights the importance of what they're doing. And that's really the hope of this plan. And hopefully some landowners will see it and say, oh yeah, this really resonates with me. But it really highlights the important work that those organizations are doing.
And I can add to that a little bit. So, a lot of this does cost money. And, to manage a forest, you do need experts out there to help guide private landowners. And so there are special funding opportunities for landowners to take advantage of and to manage anywhere from trees down to the invasive species on their land. So, so it's important to help landowners not only with information, but also available funding as well. So, so there's, a program called Wiffle Gap. There's also NRCS has funding programs for managing their land and forests and invasive species, things like that. So it's just a matter of them contacting these agencies and they'll get the help.
Yeah, I will add one more piece to that. Just if you go on the DNR website, you can find contact information, and that's a really great place to start. Or you could just email me and Colleen, and we can connect you to the right place if that's what you're interested in.
So Colleen, I was just interested, you talked about the black ash and what's likely to succeed that, and what were you planting out there to prepare for that? I'm just curious.
How much time do we have? No, it's interesting because lately that's been my focus is because of a larger grant that we received is to take a look at black ash and look at its characteristics because not all black ash stands are the same. So we have to understand them. And what we're trying to understand is the soil characteristics, the hydrology, everything you want to know about black ash. So, because what we know is, you know, the stands of black ash that we have now, some of them weren't always black ash. They were either hemlock or cedar or, so we're trying to get an understanding of what black ash is and what these sites are. And some areas you might see, after emerald ash borer goes through, you might see, you know, red maple taking over if there's a seed source, or you might see elm in some spots. You might see in the south, you know, swamp white oak might establish in these areas. So we're trying to experiment with all kinds of different species, maybe do a little bit of assisted migration with swamp white oak up north and hackberry up north. So, you know, those are just some things we're throwing out to see if they can adapt to the northern latitudes.
So Elizabeth has a question here. Is one of the goals to increase the percentage of publicly owned forest land? Is there a goal to increase the interaction of the state and federal forest services to manage national forest lands?
So I can speak towards the state forests. They do have, you know, periodically, they have acquisition plans in place. And they're always looking for to, you know, shore up the boundaries of the state forests, and including the properties that are within the state forests that are private. So whenever there's an opportunity, you know, they do discuss land acquisition, and that's part of the master plan as well for many of these state forests. And I'm certain that the federal forests go through the same very similar land acquisition process. But they also have to assess, you know, the equal exchange. I think it's on an exchange basis where they look at land acquisition. So that's a little bit about what I know.
This is kind of a related question I wanted to interject about, and it's again specific to northern Wisconsin. You know, we still have some industrial forest out there, but a lot of that is being carved up into smaller and smaller blocks. And I know that at least in the past, the stewardship program has been really important to putting in place easements, so they're not actually public lands, but they remain a large block of forest. And I just thought maybe Colleen would want to comment to the importance of the stewardship program.
Yeah, every now and then there's, you know, a team that's put together to take a look at some, you know, priority areas to take a look at for acquisition and easements. I know even private landowners are being encouraged to take a look at their lands for conservation easements on their properties as well. We have some great land trusts in the north, the Northwoods Land Trust, and then also their name has changed, but there's another land trust over in the Northwest here that is very active as well. And you know, they just like with the DNR, we all meet together, an integrated group, and we start talking about these priority areas for conservation easements. And it's been a very worthwhile initiative that's happening. But things have slowed down, you know, over the last 10 years or so because of just our administration changing and things like that. So hopefully this will pick up again.
One thing I wanted to comment, in my career at DNR, I worked on the water quality issues. I worked on the best management practices document a little bit, at least in the background. And I was always impressed at the collaboration between the state and the federal and the county forests, and even some of those industrial forests. They really tried to work together and look at larger landscape issues. Yeah, they each have separate plans, but I think they all kind of work very well together, in my opinion. And I always said that the water quality in northern Wisconsin is tied very closely to the way we manage our forests. And so it's really a great thing that we have that kind of collaboration.
Yeah, and I think as issues arrive, the issues of maybe these storm events that, we've been encountering, it's been occurring more and more often that we sit down at the table with our partners and we start talking about what's happening on the ground. Because take, for instance, Langlade County, boy, did they need help over there. And, a lot of folks, a lot of our foresters and other folks just drop what they're doing to help with this event that happened over there. So, and, there's other examples of events as well. So
that had a big impact on the market too,
mhm.
because there was a lot of wood on the market relatively quickly that wasn't in the plan. So
Mhm.
this didn't impact Langlade County. It impacted every, anybody who was managing wood, private or public.
Mhm.
I think this is a good question for you, Amanda. I wonder how different or similar this plan is to Michigan or Minnesota, and with our trends and goals, are they similar or do they have a similar process?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I actually, during the whole process of developing this plan, I work with my counterparts in all of the states in the Northeast region. So there's 14 states all the way over to New York, and we work together just to troubleshoot issues and talk about how we're approaching the process. A lot of states approach the process a little bit differently to tailor it to their state's forests and how their partners engage with the agency. When you look at the trends and the goals, there is a ton of similarities. We're all kind of thinking about this long-term picture about climate change, about increasing forests, about engaging landowners and landowner management and parcelization. So you see a ton of overlap in these overarching statements. How it was tackled and how it's organized is a little bit different though.
So Nicole followed up with just landmark conservancy question mark?
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. Yeah, that's it. The name changed about a year or two ago.
Okay, so I just have to switch over to the Q&A. There's a couple questions over there. I always have to be watching both here. Garlic mustard is becoming a problem in Bios County. Are county employed logging contractors made aware of their role in the spread of invasive species? And I would add, private land, the same. What are we doing to educate loggers?
Yeah, I'm glad, Bonnie, you're astute with garlic mustard and keeping an eye out for that species and other invasives. So kudos to you. But yes, just like with our best management practices for water quality, we also have best management practices for invasive species and how to address them. So not only do logging contractors have to go through some training on invasive species and how to clean their equipment and what they can do, but also foresters. Foresters go through the training as well. So we're trying to cover all bases, but I don't know, this species is catching up with us, I think, up north here. So we just have to keep an eye out. And in fact, our forest research branch is taking a look at how garlic mustard is impacting tree regeneration through the mycorrhizal association. And so that keep your eye out on a study like that, because it's going to be really important to forestry.
Okay. One more question here from Mary. Do you have a plan? And you talked a little bit about this in the presentation, but working with individual landowners to spend time with them and get the information that they need. And have you been able to see success as to the impact you have had by working with individual landowners?
I can start this one, and Colleen, you can take over after I give you what I know. So from the Division of Forestry, what we have an initiative to connect with landowners. It's one of the things we have a goal every year of connecting with landowners as part of the Wisconsin Private Forestry Advisory Committee, put together a goal of connecting with 1 million landowners over a time frame that I cannot remember. So we took a chunk of that and we track that. So every year we're seeing how many landowners we're connecting with, and I believe others are doing that as well. There's a ton of ways that connection happens. A lot of it's, you know, talking to your neighbor, talking to your family member, getting people connected. But there are, like the Driftless Forest Network initiative pilots about mailing resources to landowners. And My Wisconsin Wood, they're reaching out to landowners to get them connected with a DNR forest or another entity to kind of do a walkthrough and show them around their property to help them move along what they call a continuum of engagement from that walkthrough to actually having a plan for their property.
Yeah, I tend to think of northern Wisconsin with the Nicolay, Schwamigan, the state forest, all of that public land. But you know, you get to Wausau and you might have a few county forests in central Wisconsin, but it's mostly private land, and there's still forests to manage there. And I think that's a good goal to have, is to have all that contact going on. So kudos. So Elizabeth asked a question. Elizabeth, the presentation will be available on our YouTube channel. So you'll have access to the presentation there. If you want it emailed to you, I can talk to Colleen and Amanda about that. But I'd encourage you to go back and view the presentation on our YouTube channel. And Don is pretty good about getting that up in the next day or so.
Yeah, and I would just mention the question asked if there was questions emailed pre-presentation. I didn't see any before we started, so there may be some in my email right now, but I'm not that tech savvy to get back to my email to check right now. If there is, I will forward it to the speakers and have them contact you directly.
I do, and they were pretty specific. I can throw them out there. Hold on a second while I dig them out. And there were 2 of them, and they were essentially almost the same. So. Of course, now I'm not finding them in my. All right, found it. Maybe I can even just share it on the screen and Colleen can have a jab at it. It's mostly about the kind of specific, and the plan is broad and goal, but there's a lot of logging underway in the Northern Highland forest, many new logging roads, and reopening many older roads. Is this causing a lot of increased traffic, trucks, ATVers, causing more problems with natural areas. So it's kind of specific to the Northern Highland. So want to take a stab at it, Colleen?
I can address some of it because this is a real specific question. So let's see here. Yeah, there is a lot of logging underway, and it's in accordance with the master plan. Every time that there's a stand that reaches a certain age, the foresters take a look at what's going on as far as management goes. But this does open up traffic, and that is one point that I made in my presentation about roads and infrastructure. It's not only happening on state forests, but also federal forests and private lands as well. So road infrastructure is a concern. It's kind of like an invite to ATVs sometimes. So we have to be careful. And I know we do have law enforcement that patrols areas, but when there's only one or two folks in law enforcement covering these areas, it can be quite a workload. We often try on state forest, we try different techniques for closing roads, gates, large boulders or rocks, sometimes berms, and none of these are foolproof. An ATV can get around any one of these. And gates are very expensive. And then to get the berms out there, you need heavy equipment to make the berm. So we try a variety of tactics. We try signage. We even have cameras out there. So there's a lot of different tactics we're using. And so we're just trying to make folks aware that to be careful, not to go behind the berms and gates and things like that. So that's the best way I can answer that question. If anyone wants to add to that.
I think the other thing the department is trying to do with ATVs is to provide recreational opportunities for ATV trails, so that it provides some place for people to go. And it's a popular thing in the north. You see them coming in the summertime the same way the snowmobiles come in the wintertime. And it's important to the economy. And so I think by having areas where they can recreate the way they want to, that helps relieve some of that illegal activity you talked about. And again, I worked in my career, I worked on sustainable ATV trails, which is a difficult thing. To make sure that they aren't damaging the environment. And a lot of the ATV clubs do their own policing. I'm amazed at what they'll do in this area, because they don't want their organization to get a bad rap either. So a combination of things. You'll always have some people that always don't do it right, though. So it's a little off the topic of the forest management plan, but an interesting discussion. Anything else, Don?
I don't see any other questions.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. I just had a fantastic time, and I've been listening to a couple of the presentations you've had in the past, and I think it's such a great program you have here.
Thank you. And we want to thank you also, because it was a very informative program, and I appreciate the fact that you're willing to answer questions like you were. The audience, the participants that were here tonight were very engaged in asking really good questions, and it's nice to see that for them and for you. Besides thanking you, I also want to thank all of them for just participating. I think it's important for us to provide these webinars. I've had a number of people tell us that we hope you continue these after COVID, and right now the plan is to continue this on. To do a better job, we need feedback. And so after the conference ends, there'll be a little email come out to everyone asking you to provide answers to a few survey questions. If you could do that, we'd appreciate it. I also wanted to mention that our program next month is going to be on using online historical newspapers for locating information on historical logging companies. And I'll be giving that talk. There'll be information coming out about that in the next day or two. It'll be posted to our Facebook page, to our website. There's also a link that'll be coming out in the current issue of Chips and Sawdust, which is at the printers now. So with that, again, thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Colleen. Very informative talk. Appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who attended, and we look forward to seeing you next month when we talk about historical newspapers. Thank you again.
Have a good evening.
You
Thank
too.
you.